So essentially he's saying, yes, it is possible that Germany produces more and that they sell in order to be able to buy more food, but he also says that everything depends on if there are enough buyers. He continues.
In practice, however, this in no way changes the fact of the inadequate sustenance of a nation as a result of insufficient soil. For to be sure, we can increase certain industrial outputs, indeed many times over, but not the production of foodstuffs. Once a nation suffers from this need, an adjustment can take place only if a part of its industrial overproduction can be exported in order to compensate from the outside for the foodstuffs that are not available in the homeland. But an increase in production having this aim achieves the desired success only when it finds a buyer, and indeed a buyer outside the country. Thus we stand before the question of the sales potential, that is, the market, a question of towering importance.
Hitler goes on to explain that the buyers are limited and that many industrial countries will be competing harshly for these few buyers.
The present world commodity market is not unlimited. The number of industrially active nations has steadily increased. Almost all European nations suffer from an inadequate and unsatisfactory relation between soil and population. Hence they are dependent on world export. In recent years, the American Union has turned to export, as has also Japan in the East. Thus, a struggle automatically begins for the limited markets, which becomes tougher the more numerous the industrial nations become, and conversely, the more the markets shrink. The more market difficulties increase, the more bitterly will the struggle for the remaining ones be waged. Although the primary weapons of this struggle lie in pricing and in the quality of the goods with which nations competitively try to undersell each other, in the end, the ultimate weapons even here lie in the sword. The so-called peaceful economic conquest of the world could take place only if the earth consisted of purely agrarian nations and but one industrially active and commercial nation. Since all great nations today are industrial nations, the so-called peaceful economic conquest of the world is nothing but the struggle with means which will remain peaceful for as long as the stronger nations believe they can triumph with them. That is, in reality, for as long as they are able to kill the others with peaceful economics. For this is the real result of the victory of a nation with peaceful economic means over another nation. Thereby one nation receives possibilities of survival and the other nation is deprived of them. Now even the American Union is emerging in all fields as the sharpest competitor to all European nations fighting as export nations for the world's markets. The size and the wealth of her domestic market permits production figures and thereby production equipment which so reduce manufacturing costs that, despite enormous wages, it no longer seems possible to undercut her prices. Here the development of the automobile industry may be considered as a warning example. Not only because we Germans, for instance, despite our laughable wages, are not in a position, even only to a degree, to export successfully against American competition, but we must also look on as American cars spread alarmingly even to our own country. This is possible only because the size of her domestic market, her wealth in purchasing power, and also in raw materials that guarantees the American automobile industry domestic sales figures, which alone make possible manufacturing methods, which in Europe would be impossible in consequence of the lack of these domestic sales potentials.
Hitler goes on to say that there lies great danger in overcrowding a territory with more people than it can sustain, were something to happen to the outside food provider.
A special danger of the so-called peaceful economic policy, however, lies above all in the fact that it makes possible an increase in the population, which finally no longer stands in any relation to the productive capacity of its own soil to support life. Thus overfilling of an inadequate living space with people that it cannot sustain. A healthy folk, at least, will always seek to find the satisfaction of its needs on its own soil. Any other condition is pathological and dangerous, even if it makes possible the sustenance of a folk for centuries. World trade, world economy, tourist traffic, and so on and so forth are all transient means for securing a nation's sustenance. They are dependent upon factors which are partly beyond calculation and which, on the other hand, lie beyond a nation's power. At all times, the surest foundation for the existence of a folk has been its own soil.
What Hitler seems to mean here is that becoming dependent on food from an outside nation puts Germany in a tremendously weak power political position. Essentially, he seems to mean that if Germany establishes a dependence on another country for food, it will become easy for that country to starve Germany's population by simply stopping the shipments of food. Germany loses its independence, hence it puts Germany in a weak negotiation position.
The country that has imported food is overpopulated, and now in consequence of the loss of all the real basic requirements, they no longer have any possibility of being able to feed their overgrown mass of people adequately. They have no strength to break the chains of the enemy. If a nation has a balance between domestic production and demand in all fields, they make the subsistence of the people as a whole more or less independent of foreign countries, and thus help to secure the freedom of the state and the independence of the nation, particularly in difficult periods. For one thing, the possibility of preserving a healthy peasant class as a foundation for a whole nation can never be valued highly enough. Many of our present-day sufferings are only the consequence of the unhealthy relationship between rural and city population.
Moreover, he also says that if a nation becomes an industrial export economy, that would lead then to a concentration of people in cities, which he deems undesirable. Check out the next part of this documentary below.